Hello everyone. So in the last video we set up the initial lighting and we talked about some of the considerations when working with MNPRX in production. So now it's time for us to grab what we have and make it look like the reference color script, which is this one. Now we need to remember that it's not going to be so yellowish. It needs to look more like this so that in the end we have a video that can work with something like this as well. So let's get to it. First things first, I do need some more atmospheric tint. I'm going to remove this. There are some materials in the scene that were set up previously that have some weird values. So for example, here we have a NoiseFX that has a very small scale. So I'm gonna pick this up, gonna go noise effects here, and I'm gonna reset this here. There we go. So we don't have this graininess anymore, and we can continue working. So what's very important in this case is to work from the camera where this shot is pretty much set rest for. So we go to the outliner, and I'm gonna just click and drag the shot cam that we have here, and I'm gonna hide this plane for now. So this is what we are working with. As you can see, we have the characters here and this entire setup. In case you want to see the timeline, you can always return to the normal view. As you can see, the animation is rather simple. It's a static shot, so the camera is not moving. This helps us speed up a little bit the stylization process as well. So the first things first is customize the materials in the scene for them to look somehow like this. I'm gonna go back into my full view, and I'm going to simply select everything we have in the scene. I'm going to go in the viewport, show selection highlighting, so that we don't see what is being selected basically. And what I want to do is use the bulk attribute tool to change all the materials in the scene at the same time. The bulk attribute tool will show all the attributes of all the materials in the scene and allows you to modify them all at once. So right now it will show the ones from the last selected material. So this is really cool because we can say, okay, the shade color in the reference, let me go into the right reference, is more a little bit towards bluish than just black. So I'm gonna change that. I'm gonna put the shade color is gonna be more on the blue side of things. And here you can define if it's color shading or not. We don't want color shading for now. We can define then the shade wrap, which we want the shade wrap to be just about there. Here we can define in terms of the diffuse factor. In case we're doing a night scene, for example, you want a diffuse factor of 1 because this is really going to give you black values in that case. The shade, I'm gonna reset it. So now that the materials are all starting to have the same values, you're starting to see the same effects on them as well. We definitely don't want a diffuse factor of 1 because we're dealing with very few lights. However, we do want some 0.3, for example, diffuse factor. Then in terms of shade color, I do want this to go a bit darker. We can modify this color afterwards. This is still a bit too dark, so I'm gonna remove the shade wrap for now. I am gonna increase, however, the cambiante, which is when light hits a surface, how much it kind of changes towards a brighter hue. And I'm gonna put this to 1. By the way, if you want to know exactly what all of these attributes make, right, you should definitely check the documentation in the Uber material side. So if I open this here, this is the documentation. If I go into the Uber material, here you can see with videos for each attribute what each one is actually doing, so that you don't just, I mean, it's very fun to play around with, but once you know what's actually doing, all the attributes make sense. So we're gonna go here. I'm gonna add the cambiante to 2 for now. So as you can see, we cannot see much of change in the cambiante because this affects the lit areas of the objects. And in this case, the lit areas are here in the front, not in the back. So as you can see, this is the lit area. So whenever I change cambiante, you can see how the material changes on the lit part of the object. So let me go back to the shot cam, which is here. So I'm gonna select all of these again. In order to not lose the selection within the bulk attribute tool, what we can do for that is we can unclick here auto refresh. What does it mean? It's gonna basically save the state whenever you disable this. And I'm gonna click somewhere else. I can even show the selection highlight again, so I can even select this. But whenever I change, for example, the colored shading, it's still gonna change all the objects where this bulk attribute was last getting the attributes from, basically. So what we want here is we don't want any colored shading. We could add a spotlight that illuminates them from the front, but we can also change the reflectance model. Since we're not using any shadows, we can change a reflectance model to, for example, extended Lambert. And what this is going to do is it's going to change all the materials in the scene to have a different reflectance model that will wrap more around the object itself. Now this is doing it for all the objects in the scene, so it takes a little bit. But yeah, it basically goes beyond the usual Lambert behavior. What I mean by that is this is a usual Lambert behavior where you have the light and it goes until half of the sphere, and whatever is behind it doesn't get lit at all. So with these other reflectance models, you can change this behavior. However, they won't be very compatible with shadow mapping in general because you're kind of going a bit too far in terms of where light should be normally. In this case, it doesn't matter. You can play around with these different reflectance models, especially also when you're using, for example, a shadow pass from an external renderer. Playing around with different reflectance models can give you some very nice results as well. There's also angular Lambert, which is a bit different in terms of algorithm. But yeah, you can play around a lot with these values as well. Just remember when changing settings from a ShaderFX file, on many ShaderFX files, this can take a little bit until all the materials recompile basically. So I'm gonna keep it to Lambert and I'm gonna try to do things with lighting instead. I'm moving my bulk attribute tool to this side once it finishes compiling. Alright, so now I want to create a new light. Why don't we create a point light? We can see this here. We can create a point light in this area so that all the characters have a nice ring light to them. And this point light is somewhere else. It's here. Let's make it bigger. Put it here. In terms of scale, we can't really change this much. But there we go. And we're going back to the shot cam. Alright, so we're having something that is a bit closer now. I'm gonna move this up. So there's our light and our directional light, which should also be there. So something that we need to take care of, basically if we transform this color reference into this, what we would have is this would be more in terms of less yellowish and more white, right? But in terms of shading on contrasts, we want to achieve a similar thing. So Totti is pretty much going to be in the shade, but the characters and the rest won't. So let's see how we can make that happen. Since I don't have auto refresh here, this is still going to be affecting all the materials in the scene, which is very useful. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna move the diffuse factor a bit down. We don't need a color tint anymore because, well, our scene now is more like this. It doesn't have any sort of tint as such the tint is more towards white, so we can leave that like that. We have things like specularity on some materials, but for now we don't need to tweak this for every material in the scene. These stylization procedural are things that use noise effects basically, so that's something that we should keep in mind. And yeah, these values are a little bit far off. I'm gonna still leave them like that, but yeah, there's also some transparent materials here, so that's why we're getting these UI as well. So let's continue changing this. So light is going to be very important here, because since things go towards white in the reference, we can take this to our advantage. So whenever I'm doing this, you're starting to see that things are going towards white in the lit parts of the area. There's also a highlight attribute, which I'm going to show a bit later. Another thing that we can do instead of just not showing the selection highlight is to disable auto materials here and then just click on matte. This is going to show the material attributes, and the bulk attribute tool is going to grab them as well. So now that I have explained a little bit the attributes, I'm just gonna speed myself up, and whenever I see a point where I need to explain something, I will explain it and then speed up the video again. See you in a bit. So something that I did here that is key is I completely removed the directional light, and I'm just working with a spotlight now, because it gives me a much more defined what's lit and what's unlit, so that I can manipulate the materials better. So I'll continue with this. By keeping the light setup simple, it allows me to much better use things like the rim light here. For example, if I disable the rim light and enable rim light opposite, which was not working with the previous two light setup, now we can see that the rim light opposite is working as intended, and then I can completely customize the amount of rim light that I have. Okay, so I've reached a point where I'm kind of happy with the initial setup of the characters, and what I need to do now is the background, concentrate on the background and how we're going to achieve this more of a dreamy stylization. Especially once we see this, we see a lot of there's a lot of fluctuations between pigment density, and certain parts are fading towards white, some not. So we need to take this into account now. So how to do that? There's different ways to do that. We need to remember that the stylization in MNPRX always goes from the highest level to the lowest level, meaning highest level, the entire image, for example. So setting style presets or modifying the configuration node to have like different effects or edge darkening or whatever you want to add. Those affect the entire image, so they are very high level of control. Now, the advantage of using MNPRX is that one can art direct at multiple levels of control. So we can go to more of a mid-level of control, modifying materials or modifying the effects within the materials themselves. And we can go to very low levels of control where we really go vertex painting each effect that we have in MNPRX. And of course there's the fourth level of control, which is a proxy, which are like invisible objects that you can put anywhere in order to control your stylization. So for now I'm going to do a little bit of, in general, just noise effects to the scene. And once we have that, we're gonna be adding some proxies to achieve this more blown out result. So let's get started. So what I'm gonna do is first open the NoiseFX tool. By the way, this is high level of control towards lowest level of control, so it's everything ordered accordingly. I'm gonna open the noise effects, and this is the NoiseFX UI. This allows you to add some fluctuations to different effects throughout the whole scene. And the way this works, basically on all selected objects. I'm gonna remove this, moving this here, so I can literally select all of them. So I have all of them selected, and I'm gonna add some pigment turbulence variations here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm simply going to drag the NoiseFX parameter, and we should start seeing the effect appearing over the entire scene. So it took a while to compile the material, but once it's compiled, we can definitely tweak these to our liking. And I want to modify the scale as well. Modifying all the materials in the scene at once, so this is a little bit heavy for the computer currently, but we don't need to be very precise. The idea of this is to just add more of a naturally occurring fluctuation to this. And things in the back, of course, are going to have a different scale than things in the front. So for example, on this building here, we have some nice fluctuation here, but in the objects in the front, we see that this fluctuation is way too big. So we need to take care of that as well. There we go. And now I'm gonna select objects further in front, and then I can tweak this a little bit better. Just adding some variation to it. I'm gonna pick both skins, and I'm gonna pick Totti as well. Not work out. So the problem here was that this character had a 2D noise instead of a 3D noise, and this changed the way things were being applied to it. So in the future, there's only gonna be 3D noise because we now have the tools to bake this 3D noise to moving objects. But since this was an older stylization, there was this problem still. So I'm resetting here and applying some noise effects again, and then I'm reducing the intensity. So I normally just increase the intensity to see where the noise scale looks like, and then I'm reducing it. Another way to do this is to enable this button here, and then you can also see what these parameters are doing with the scene. So in effects that are not that evident, you can see, okay, this is the parameters that it's actually manipulating. You can toggle this off and then you can continue. All right, so I'll leave it like that. I have noticed too that something seems to be off in the eyes of the characters. And yeah, there seems to be like a semi-transparent cornea there that was not converted correctly to MNPRX afterwards. So it's always gonna be these cases that we need to take care of. This character has everything in order. So I'm gonna move to the shot cam and continue basically adding noise effects. So the idea is to add a natural fluctuation of different effects just everywhere in the scene, and then we're gonna deal with the rest of the effects. In case you want to really see what the output is going to look like, you can always use the floating viewport and either use one of the predetermined resolutions. By default it's 720p, or you can go full HD, or even create your own custom float viewport. For this production it's in this resolution, like double this resolution. So I'm just gonna float the viewport here, and as you can see we can have perspective here to move freely around, and then we have the MNPRX viewport here as well. That allows us to quickly do and iterate with something close to the native resolution. We can also go and make this bigger and work with a full HD as well resolution. Or in case you wanna disable it, just click on it again, or simply close it, and then this viewport is going to become the MNPRX viewport. Let's go back to perspective and upload the viewport. I'm going to work with this viewport here so I can see clearly what's going to be in the frame now. Now we have just added noise effects of one effect, but we can also add for any other effect in the scene as well. And this is going to add a lot more finesse to the render itself. Now the cool thing about this is that you don't need to do this for every scene. Once you're happy with it, you can export the style. So here the import export, you can export it, either the materials, the PaintFX, even the proxies, and then you can import it in any other scenes that might be using the same assets. So you're gonna have the same stylization that you did here in other scenes as well, and allowing you to work much quicker in production. So I'm gonna continue adding some more effects, especially with the edge darkening I want to add. I want to add some color bleeding as well. And once I'm happy with that, I'm gonna be adding some proxies, and the rest I'm gonna be refining with PaintFX to achieve the effects that I want. All right, so I'm rather happy now with the initial noise effects that I added. So before going further, I'm gonna save the scene, and then we're gonna add some proxies so that we can achieve the kind of like blown up look that you see here. We're gonna achieve this together, of course, with the bloom effect, which I'm gonna add as well. Alright, I've added the plane so that we have the very nice vignette on the plane material in front, and I'm going to change it so that we can't really select this plane over here. So I'm just gonna create a new, oh, it already has one. Perfect. So I'm gonna reference this so that I can select it. There we go. So the goal of this is to make it look more like this, but however, not with a yellow tint, but rather a white tint. So let's get to it. Since this is a very static shot, we can very much easily do this by using proxy planes that will have some paint effects applied to them. So certain areas are more diluted than others. So let's get to that. Gonna create a plane, and I'm gonna increase the resolution because effects are encoded per vertex, right? The more topology we have, so the more vertices we have, the more resolution we will have to encode effects in. In the construction history, I'm gonna make 50. So this gives us a good head start. Now that we have that, what I would recommend is to always delete the construction history. And now we can resize this to our liking. I have this here so that I can see the dimension of this plane. So this is our reference. This is what we need to achieve here, right? So as you can see, most of the scene is covered by this proxy plane. I'm going to move this one down. Proxies don't need to be just planes, right? So we can also do is select a face here, do a soft select, increase the influence of a soft select, and then we can begin rotating this, that everything is covered from the camera perspective. So now that we have our first plane, we can convert this to a proxy. We go into the material presets and we load up the proxy material. So this automatically will make it completely transparent and will still support the NoiseFX and PaintFX that we want. So I'm gonna start first with adding some noise effects, just a little bit of Pigment Turbulence. Can shift this all towards a bit more whitish and then reduce the intensity maybe a bit. What we can also do is we can further bleed things. And you can see how this is interacting here with the toggle, right? Maybe something like this, and then increase it. If you want everything to be a bit more bled, you can also move this up a bit so you can really see what's happening here. The thing of using noise effects is that you can't really sometimes control where things are. So we can start with the noise effects and then we can continue with the paint effects, which is also here as a tab. Once you're here, you can decide, okay, I want to have this part here a bit more bled out. This part has too much detail as well. But then we can go, this part can be a little bit more diluted. This is very strong currently. Accumulate some here. We're using a very hard brush. I'm going to use a more softer brush. So now that we have this, we can go and act on the characters. As you can see here, the characters here are also quite bled in general. So for this case, what I'm gonna do is apply the noise effects on the characters themselves. So I'm just selecting everything here. Just a rough selection because this is per material. Noise effects are per material, so as soon as I select one piece of geometry that already has that material, noise effects is going to be applied to the material, right? And hence to all the other objects that have it assigned to. And I want to see what I'm doing with the color bleeding. So as we can see from the reference, the bleeding areas are very broad, so we need to achieve the same kind of thing. In case the noise effects or the vertex effects viewing ever gets stuck, what you need to do is to just go to the pass inspector and select the output target again. This will automatically reset it. So the problem of adding very broad noise effects, the bleeding, is that you start to lose details in parts where you might not want to lose details in. So as you can see here, I'm losing details in the face or on the shirt and so forth. So we need to address this ourselves as well. So what we can add is something like this, maybe so that at least the faces don't have bleeding. Then of course we can reduce the amount of bleeding here. There we go. And now we're going to start painting things a bit more. So I'm gonna be selecting this and painting bleeding myself. So I kind of like the way this is bleeding, but I don't like how this arm is bleeding. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna revert the effect of the noise effects basically. So what I'm painting here, I'm reverting what the noise effects were doing so that we have a clearer silhouette again. And we can do the same thing with the back of the face. Face in general is something that we want to have clear, right? So that we can read what is happening in the action. So this works. This is also working. I think that Totti here is almost working. Let me revert things a little bit. With B, by holding B, you can control the size of the brush when using PaintFX. Right, so let's see how this is looking. Alright, so we have this working a little bit. I'm gonna create another proxy so that we can have another layer of effects here. So I'm gonna duplicate it and push it up front. And yeah, once I have that, I can revert any noise effects that I did so that I start with a clean slate. And once I have that, I also want to reset some of the effects that I might have painted. There we go. So working with planes in this way works in this case, especially because the camera is static. If it wouldn't be static, you would be seeing something like effects floating around, which is not something that you necessarily want. So this is the way to go for static cameras. For non-static cameras, we would really need to go and paint onto the objects themselves. Something that I've realized is that my scene in general gets very dark compared to the reference, so I'm gonna need to address that as well. What I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna dilute this entire scene a little bit. Pick the one at the back and I'm gonna increase a little bit so that the one in the front can decrease the dilution as well. Alright, so let's say for now I'm happy with the proxies, which are here. Let's call this properly. And I'm gonna add these two to my reference layer, to the border. Add selected objects so that I don't get to select them. And I'm gonna modify the materials themselves to come closer to the reference. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select all of them, especially the characters, and maybe this lantern as well. I'm gonna go into my bulk attribute tool to modify all of them at the same time. But I'm gonna play with this. I'm gonna add also some blue into the shadows of these objects. Now for the skin, I'm also gonna add a little bit of red so as to hint a little bit of subsurface scattering. So the shade color is gonna be red instead of blue. Alright, and now what I'm also gonna do is I'm gonna add some bloom to this as well. Increase a little bit the overall effect. So I'm gonna go here into bloom intensity and I'm gonna increase it so you can see what's happening. And then I'm gonna blur the bloom intensity so that it looks a little bit more dreamlike. And what I also want to do is, in general, make the paper whiter. And this you also do here in the settings. Yes, the canvas light tilt, I'm gonna put it a bit higher. This is automatically gonna make everything a bit brighter because this controls basically the lighting at which the painting is being lit. So 65 is actually the new default, but since this scene is a bit older, it didn't have this default value. And then I'm gonna increase the roughness a bit again All right. In the reference picture, Totti is quite dark. I'm gonna make him a bit darker as well, just increasing the diffuse factor. And I'm gonna make its rim lights still a bit brighter as well. As you can see, you can really go and tweak this until you like it. I'm still gonna make some tweaks until I like it, and then I'm gonna send it for review. So I'm gonna be sped up and see you once I'm done. Something that I also want to add when working with proxies or proxy planes is to always work from the back to the front, because effects do accumulate. So in case you start at the back and you're happy with it, once you add a proxy to the front and you add effects to it, they will accumulate. So the effects that you set up in the proxy of the back won't look the same. So always try to work from the back to the front of the scene when working with proxies. As you might have noticed, I was just using PaintFX all over the scene to get to the look that I wanted it to have. So I'm still gonna add some final tweaks in the proxy back. Whenever I reference proxies so that I can't select them here, I go to the outliner and just select them and continue using PaintFX or the like. For the sake of finishing this video and this tutorial, let's say we're happy with the result now, so we want to export it. So of course, first save, like in every scene, but then you have two different ways to export it. If you want to see how it's gonna look like when rendered, you can always come here and change the quality to TAA. This is gonna give you the very fine grain result that you get in the end once you render things out. As you can see, I'm not entirely happy with the eye. The eye is a bit dark, so it's always good to check that up and then to iterate based on that. I'm gonna open the bulk attribute tool, gonna make it a bit more caliente. Let's say it's 2. So yeah, that's a bit nicer, it's a bit whiter. And okay, so let's say I'm happy with this. There's two ways to render. The Viewport renderer, which allows you to save screenshots or do a quick play blast. And then there's of course the target sequencer, which allows you to really output a sequence of targets, right? So the final production. For the sake of reviews, you can always just do a quick play blast, either with FXAA or if you have a very powerful GPU with 4 times super sampling. Or you can also just render out an image sequence and then put that into a video later on. So for now, I'm simply gonna do a play blast and we'll send it for review. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below. If you like this video, hit the like button and subscribe to be notified about future tutorials, series, demos, anything we do, and our next software as well. So please subscribe. If you want to support us, please consider becoming our Patreon. We have some amazing exclusive scenes over there, and you have access to our Discord where you can chat with others using MNPRX and with us as well. If you want to use this software commercially, get our plugin, you also get access to our Discord server, and what's best, you get direct support from us to make your vision come to life. That's it. See you next time.